So we're going to be talking about living organisms. And so we're going to be starting today talking about the characteristics of life. And so one of the characteristics of living organisms is that they have order. And what this means is that they generally maintain a constant internal environment. And we're going to talk more about this when we talk about homeostasis. So order would be the maintenance of a constant internal environment. We're also going to be talking about the hierarchy of biological order, which is related to this because it starts to talk about cells and then how cells can be grouped into tissues, and then tissues can come together to form organs. And then we have systems, and then we have the whole organism. But in general, this process of maintaining order is referred to as homeostasis. And we're going to talk more about this, but homeostasis is kind of a misnomer in that it makes it sound like it is a constant internal environment that does not change. But we know that change is really important as we adjust to differences in the environment. So I will put the maintenance of and I'm going to put a caveat here, a relatively constant environment. How about that? Okay. So the other thing that the maintenance of a relatively constant internal environment requires is it requires obtaining energy and nutrients from your environment. So this would be obtaining energy and nutrients from the environment. So our internal environment consists of cells. The cells maintain a relatively constant internal environment, so they have to interact with the environment inside of our bodies. And then as a living organism, we have to interact with our environment as well. So this idea of the transfer of energy and nutrients and using those is related to metabolism. So metabolism is all the chemical reactions that occur in your body. So these could be chemical reactions that build proteins, for example. It could also be the chemical reactions that break down carbohydrates in order to produce ATP, which is the form of energy that our cells use. And so these metabolic processes are occurring inside of the cells, and they help us to maintain this order that we have in our body. Because if we don't use energy to maintain this order, we will tend to move towards a state of entropy, which means that we have a great disorder. So things tend to go from order to disorder. And so this metabolism and obtaining energy and nutrients from the environment is very important. Now we also have responsiveness. So let's open up a new page. I didn't want a page that's white, but we'll go with that. Okay, so we could talk about responding to the environment. So this is responsiveness. So when we look at responsiveness, this allows our body to adjust to differences in our environment, and it could be an internal environment, and it can be also external environment. So when we look at, say, for example, internally, if our glucose levels drop too low, our body will respond by releasing glucose into the circulatory system. And that will be create homeostasis, a relatively constant glucose level in our blood. We could also talk about responsiveness to external factors, environments. So for example, even when we are being exposed to ultraviolet radiation, sunlight, our bodies will respond in general by producing more melanin, and that will protect our bodies. And so we have internal as well as external environments, and that responsiveness is important. Another characteristic of organisms, living organisms, is movement. And so even plants and fungi and bacteria have the ability to move. So we could talk about movement at the cellular level, and then we could talk about even movements inside the cell. So as proteins are being produced by inside the cells, those can be transported to the outside of the cell and released into our circulatory system. So movement is the motion of the whole body. So we'll put motion of whole body. So this includes inside of cells, it includes tissues, organs, and then the whole organism. So movement is a characteristic of life. We also have growth and development. So when we look at growth, we all, humans start out, and most organisms, they start out as a single cell. And then that cell is going to undergo cell division, a type of cell division that's referred to as mitosis. And then we're going to get those cells dividing and growing. And the number of cells increases over time during embryonic development. And then the cells begin to differentiate. So that means that they become specialized. So we have cell reproduction as an example of growth, and cell differentiation. So this is the process of cells becoming specialized. So that would be, for example, cells that are going to become your liver have specific genes turned on and genes turned off that makes them specialized so that they can do their function, so that they can produce blood clotting proteins, for example, or they can break down alcohol. So the liver cells are very specialized. You might have heard the term stem cells. Stem cells exist in our bodies in different places, most notably in your bone marrow, where those cells undergo cell division, and then they specialize into red blood cells and white blood cells. So stem cells and embryonic cells tend to not be specialized. And so over time, they become specialized. So growth and development is a characteristic of life. And then we have reproduction. So let's start another page here. So we have reproduction. So at the organismal level, we're going to be talking about sexual reproduction, the very end of the quarter. And sexual reproduction is the production of offspring that are genetically different than the parent. And that is important because that allows for the next generation This is also actually related to another characteristic that they don't often include in textbooks, but it has to do with aging and becoming old and then dying, and then the next generation takes over. So this characteristic is called senescence. Senescence. And senescence is growing old and dying. So most organisms, there might be some very strange organisms, maybe a fungus, for example, that doesn't have this, that continues to go on. But most organisms grow old and die. And we'll talk about some of the mechanisms of aging as we go through the anatomy and physiology this quarter.